So our speaker today is the first person we've ever had back to speak. So normally we have an executive, CEO of HEB or world-renowned investment managers come and speak. And Arnold Van Den Berg is the first person we've ever asked back twice. There's a couple of very simple reasons for that. One time I was being interviewed by a national publication, and they said, you know, who are the people that are meaningful in the development of your career? I said, you know, I know that Warren Buffett is a really big deal, but who has really made an impact upon your life other than Warren Buffett? And I said, that's the easiest question in the world for me. It's Arnold Van Den Berg. He goes, really? Well, tell me about that. And I just said, you're never going to find somebody who is more genuine, more accomplished, and more willing to help others. And that is one reason why for the last 8+ years I've considered Arnold to be a mentor and a role model to me, as well as just a tremendous friend. And as a result, it's wonderful to have him back on campus for the second time. I also think his personal story is just one that I've never encountered before. You know, they say the truth is stranger than fiction. Arnold has successfully grown a multi-billion-dollar investment firm up in Austin, but without ever going to college. First time I tried to get him to come down here, he said, I think I'm the wrong person. I don't think I should speak at TLU. I didn't get my MBA at Harvard. I didn't go to undergraduate at Harvard. I didn't go to college. And there was just a long, awkward pause at the end of that, because I was trying to figure out how do you build a multi-billion-dollar investment firm and never go to college? And I think that really is at the heart of Arnold's story, and that is that if you put your mind to it, you can truly accomplish anything. So with that as our backdrop, please help me welcome Arnold Van Den Berg.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Dave, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me back again. It was my pleasure last time, and it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. And the reason I always appreciate the opportunity is because I have some very strong views on things that I feel are very important for people to understand. And both of my parents, as you well know, were interned at Auschwitz. Many millions of people died there, including 39 members of our own family. Not all at Auschwitz, but during the Holocaust. So I feel it is important for people to understand, as time goes by, to understand what happened. So hopefully this will never happen to any people in the world. The family up there is the only survivors out of our 44-member family. 43-member, I'm sorry. And the one in the middle is me, my brother, who has since passed, but not during the Holocaust, and my mom and dad. The next slide shows you where I was born. I was born on 623 Prinsengracht, which is a very famous street even today in Holland. It was the street that Anne Frank was born on. We lived right down the street from them, and I have a map on the next slide which will show you exactly where we lived in relationship to them. So you can see at the bottom there, that's where we lived, and Anne Frank house was about 6 to 8 blocks away. On the next slide, I'm showing you some names. And what happened is a few years ago, my daughter went to visit Amsterdam. She visited the Anne Frank Museum, and there was a list of people's names there, and she went up to the guy and said, by the way, who are all these people on the list? He says, those are all the Dutch Jews that died in Auschwitz. So she went through the name, and she said her knees got a little weak when she saw my name, my parents' name, my brother's name, and my grandparents. So apparently they did not know that my parents survived. And the reason they just assumed that all the people who died in Auschwitz, because very, very, very few came back from Auschwitz, especially among the Dutch Jews, because they were sent there pretty early in the war. So what happened is that my dad was born in Germany. My mom was born in Poland, and they moved to Holland when Hitler started to come up, 1933. My dad was a student of history, and he could see the handwriting on the wall when all the things with Hitler started to come up. And that was very early because, you know, the real rise to power was about 1936 and over. But anyway, they moved to Holland. They lived there very happily. My mom and dad built a business, a very successful business. My dad was a lady coat and suit designer, and they had a little factory business with a store that sold ladies' coats and suits. My mom was an excellent businesswoman. She ran the business, and my dad did the designing. So as the Germans started coming into Holland, my dad had actually thought about moving to South Africa. But my mom talked him out of it because we had all the family there, they had the business there. She just couldn't imagine what could happen. But anyway, by the time they decided it would be a good idea to leave, it was too late. All the roads were blocked. There was no way to get out of the country. So they went into hiding. They went into the same kind of hiding that Anne Frank and her family did, up in somebody's attic. Matter of fact, I visited the people after the war, and they had a closet which shows the clothes hanging. Underneath, they had a little board where you crawled underneath it, and there was a little space where 2 or 3 people could stand. So they would stay up there if anybody was coming to the door, and if they were worried about somebody coming in and searching the house. Other than that, they could stay in the front room and so forth and so on. Well, it got to the point where things were really getting tough because the Germans were all over the neighborhood, and I was only 2.5 years old, and it was hard to keep me quiet, no different today. It's one of the traits you can tell stick with it. My brother always talked too much, and that was also a problem that stood with him his whole life. So the traits still up pretty early. Anyway, the Germans started to put a real press on it. They made the Jews wear stars so that you can identify who was a Jew, and they created all kinds of restrictions. My dad turned his business into a cash business because he knew that once the Germans would come in, they would go through the banks, they'd get the list of all the Jewish people, and they would round them up. So they did pretty good things to hide themselves and during the war. Matter of fact, there's an interesting investment concept that I'd like to share with you, and that is my grandmother told my dad, if there ever's a war, turn your money into gold. And so my dad remembered that as the war was coming in. He turned all of his money into gold. He hid it with people during the war, and he made a very handsome profit on it because the Germans looted the treasury, and Dutch currency went way down, and the price of gold went way up. So anyway, as they were trying to figure out how to work this out if the house got searched, they came to the conclusion that it was too risky to keep 2 small kids there hidden in a closet because any one of them could make some noise, and that would be it not only for us, but the whole family. So they had to figure out a way to move the kids out. Well, a friend of theirs contacted the Dutch underground, and they found a 19-year-old girl that was willing to risk her life for myself and my brother to try to smuggle me through the German lines. I will talk a little bit later about how profoundly that affected me, but I just wanted to share that can you imagine a 19-year-old girl going to risk her life to take 2 Jewish kids through the lines who she never met before? We didn't know them. What was even more surprising to me is that her father was willing to risk her life to send her basically on a suicide mission because we had to have a fake passport, and the passport was not of high quality. So anybody who really studied the passport could really figure out that it was a forgery. So that was another risk. But despite that situation, My folks decided to do it. Now you can imagine, some of you are parents in here, if you had to send your 2 children with a 19-year-old girl with a fake passport to try to get through the German lines. And I asked my mom and dad about it. My dad said, you know, Arnold, when you're in a tough situation, the most important thing is you have to make a decision. As risky as it is, it's even riskier not doing something. Because when you get to Auschwitz, which they had a big chance of ending up in, if you get to Auschwitz, the first thing they do is they gas the women and the children. They don't keep children, they don't keep women with children. So if we would have stayed with the family and they got caught, then my mother would have died, and my brother and I too. So there was a reason for the risk to take that, but it was a very profound risk. So anyway, they decided that once we were delivered to the orphanage would call a neighbor, because there wasn't a phone in the home where they were staying, and the neighbor would come over and say we arrived safely. So my mom and dad waited. It went a few hours, more hours, and all the day, during the day, my mom told my dad, listen, we got to go to, there's a butcher store down the street, they got a phone, we need to go there and make sure the kids got there. My dad argued with her and said, no, Manya, we can't do it, because if they catch us, then the kids don't have any parents either. We have to just wait and find it out. Well, my mom went along with that for a few hours, but after a while, at the end of the day, nobody called. She just had a strange feeling, which you would understand, that something happened and we didn't get there. So she finally told my dad, he said, no matter what happens, Manya, we can't take the risk of going on the street. Anyway, she finally told him, if you don't go with me, I'm going alone, but I'm going. And if you understood my mom, you would know that that's not somebody to argue with. Anyway, they went to the butcher shop and they called the orphanage. They couldn't get a hold of them. They never did find out whether we made it. They finally left, and the people who owned the butcher stores collaborated with the Germans for extra food, substances, and so forth. And so they called the Gestapo. The Gestapo was waiting for them after they walked out of the butcher shop, took them to a holding place, and then they were on their way to Auschwitz. But I was delivered to the orphanage by a lady that, the 19-year-old girl that took me to the orphanage, and my brother. And life in the orphanage was kind of a first lesson on survival. It was a Dutch orphanage with Christian people who ran it, and they hid a lot of Jewish kids in there. Most of the kids in the orphanage, or I wouldn't say most of them, but a lot of the kids were Jewish, and they tried to hide it the best they could. And they did not mean to deprive us of any of the substances like food and water, but food was scarce. Many times we didn't have much to eat, and sometimes we didn't even have water. And so we got to be very weak and skinny, and one of the first lessons I learned as a 2.5-year-old as survival is that during lunch they would have one slice of bread with some of these candies on top of it, sort of as a flavor, little tiny things. And so we would all bow our heads to pray, and when you lift up your head after the prayer, the bread was gone. So the first thing you learned is you just don't let the food sit in front of you. You have to lean over and hold it down so that somebody else wouldn't take it, because the bigger kids would always take food from the younger kids. So anyway, I was in the orphanage from 2.5 to 6, and like I say, there was a lot of deprivation there. This is not my brother and I, but it is the way the kids looked once they got out of there. And when my folks picked me up, I was so skinny that my dad was afraid to lift me up because of the fact that he was afraid my bones would break. Anyway, I almost died from malnutrition, but fortunately my folks got out and picked me up. I don't think I would have lasted probably more than 6 months. But anyway, there was a very traumatic experience during the orphanage. As the Germans were coming through the lines, they would many times stay at the orphanage or park their tanks and things like that around there. And my brother, like I said, liked to talk a lot. He was very gregarious. He never changed. And the Germans really liked him. They thought he was a cute kid. They picked him up, and he was blonde and blue-eyed at the time. Well, not blonde, not blue-eyed, but blonde. And they really liked him. They thought he was a cute kid. They gave him rides on the tank and all that. The only problem was my brother knew that he was Jewish. And as I said, many times he would say, and one of the attendants heard him one time, he says, you know, my parents don't wear the star. And that really shook the lady there, because she said if he ever said that in front of the Germans, they would obviously knew that he was Jewish, and they would figure out that other kids were Jewish there. So they had to take him out of the orphanage, but they couldn't tell me. So one time in the middle of the night, the Dutch underground came, picked him up, and took him to a farm. These were people who were willing to take in Jewish kids during the war. And so they kept him at the farm. Well, I woke up the next day looking for Zig, and I couldn't find him. I ran all over the place. I was just terrified to think that I couldn't find my brother, because he was a terrific brother. My mom had told him, you always take care of your brother, and he was always good to me, and I depended on him. And I asked all the people at the orphanage, where's my brother? Well, they couldn't tell me what happened, so they said, oh, we don't know. Nobody would tell me where he was. And I remember that that was probably the most unhappiest day of my life, because now I was probably 3.5 at the time, but I was all alone. And so that was a very lonely feeling. Took me a long time to get over that, but eventually you adjust to everything. The food conditions were so bad that many times the kids, we would go out in the field and test of which plants would taste better than the other. We'd say, geez, try this doesn't taste too bad. So we were out there eating almost anything we can get our hands on. And I remember one time that we were not allowed to drink the water. We had a pump outside, and we were not allowed to drink the water, so they told us, when you go outside and play, don't touch the pump. So anyway, we were all very thirsty, and we're standing around the pump and trying to get water out of it. And so I said, why don't we just pump a little bit? Let's get it going. And everybody says, no, you heard so-and-so, you can't do that. So I said, I'm going to go ask her. So I went there and snuck around the building, and I saw where the lady was sitting on the sewing machine. I came back, and she said it was okay. So everybody was really happy. We're out there pumping the water and drinking. All of a sudden, she comes out, and she's just livid. She said, I told you that you could not take the water. They said, well, Arnold said you could. She looks at me, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. She hit me so hard, I thought my head was going to roll. But I didn't pump anymore after that. So you do learn some lessons along the way. Anyway, my mom went to the camp in Westerbroek, which is a holding tank in Holland. And that's where they rounded all the Jews up. They'd keep them there until they had a train load, and then they would ship them to Auschwitz. So the introduction to Auschwitz was a terrible situation, a ride on the train. When you think about the conditions on the train for 3 days, it was unbelievable. And the worst of it is there was no bathrooms, no toilet facilities. They gave you a bucket, and whether it was a man and woman, children, all in the same cattle car, they would take their clothes and stand in front of it so people can go to the bathroom in the bucket. And you can imagine the bucket overflowed, and there was urine and feces all over the place. It smelled. Some of the older people actually literally died on the train. And my dad says they were the lucky ones because they saved themselves a lot of pain. But anyway, it was freezing cold. It was in Poland during the winter. And my mom and dad said it was just a horrible situation for 3 days, but they had no idea what they were getting into. But there was one little girl on the train who remembered my mom. She was a little girl in the neighborhood, and they picked her up from school. She was just by herself there, and she saw my mom, and she says, Tante Manya, that means Aunt Manya. So my mom took her with her, and so she sat with this little girl when they were trained. When they got down in Auschwitz, they immediately took the kids, moved them aside, and she said, she never saw the child again. She said the most painful thing was her. She knew what happened to the child, and she knew the mother. And so after the war, they got to lunch one time, and the lady said to her, "You know, Manya, I know my child did not live through Auschwitz, but the one thing that I would wish more than anything, if I only knew what happened, how she died, so I can put this aside." So my mom said she struggled with the idea. Should she tell her what happened? Because it was pretty bad. But if she didn't tell her, this woman would be agonized. And she said it took her a long time. And finally she said that if she was that lady, she would want to know. So she finally told the lady. And she says, "Well, I knew she was gone, but I'm comforted to know at least I don't have to think about what happened. I know now." So it's important to tell the truth about that. Anyway, my parents got to Auschwitz. They separated the men, the women, and they were kind of moving along in the line. And so my mom told me after the war, she was talking about it one time. She said, "You know, I saw Pa, his group moving away, and Pa looked at me and he had tears coming down his eyes." And she said he was practically crying. And I said, "Well, Ma, that's pretty understandable. You know, you guys were getting separated." I said, "Didn't you cry?" She says, "Nah, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction." So that gives you a little insight in who she was. But anyway, the most important thing that I feel about this experience is what we all learned from it. And what I hope to do is not talk about all the gruesome things that happened, but to talk about the wonderful lessons that you learn that have helped me in my life and many other people. And there was a lady who is still alive today. I went to her 95th birthday party, and she was literally with my mom. She met my mom in Westerbrook. They became good friends, and they literally slept on the same bunk in the same place. And she's still alive, so she told me a lot of things about my mom. But she says one of the most important lessons that she learned, and I think it applies to everybody, is that she and her mom got into an argument. They didn't talk to each other on the train. And so when they got to Auschwitz, the father went up to Beppy, is her name, Beppy Cohn, and she said, "Beppy, I have a very bad feeling about this place. I think you should apologize to your mother." Well, the way I heard the story is that she did apologize, but I talked to her son about 4 or 5 years ago, and he says, no, no, no. The thing that bothered her the most is she didn't apologize to her mother. So she says that is the most important lesson that she could ever teach, and she talks about the Holocaust to kids. And the thing that I want to communicate, which I learned from that lesson, is she got to the barracks, she couldn't sleep that night, and she got up and she walked outside of the barracks, and there was a woman standing there, apparently couldn't sleep either. And they got to talking, and she said, by the way, she saw this big chimney, and there was black smoke coming out. And she asked the lady, by the way, what is this chimney with all the smoke? What are they doing? She says, let me ask you a couple of questions. First of all, did you come here with your children? She says, no, I'm not married. I don't have any children. She said, good. She said, did you come here with your parents? She says, yes, I did. My parents came. She said, well, I hate to tell you, but you're going to find out anyway, that what they do to the women and children is they gas them the first night, and older people. So there's a good chance if your folks were older, which they were, that they are in the crematorium. And this is the smoke from the crematorium. So they are already probably gone. She said she just couldn't believe it. Can you imagine in a place of a civil society, and all of a sudden they're talking about gassing people? She said she went back to her barracks and laid down, and she said her deepest regret was her whole life she had to live with the fact that her mother went to her deathbed knowing that they were angry at their children. She said that's the first thing she teaches people whether you are in an argument with a loved one or anybody that's dear to you, even if you think you're right, apologize, because you never know what's going to happen in life. Could be an accident, could be a heart attack, something else, some natural disaster. You never know what's going to happen in life. So the first rule is you always apologize. And that has become a rule with me. Matter of fact, my wife and my daughter used to bet to see when I blow up or something. They say, how long do you think it'll take Dad to apologize? Well, it didn't take very long. But the thing that I learned about that, and that's so important in a marriage and in friendship, is the longer you let the argument go, the more both people get upset. And it just builds on itself and feeds on itself. But if you apologize right away, it just cuts all of that anguish. And so being able to apologize immediately has helped me a lot in relationships, because most of the time you're wrong anyway, so you might as well apologize, right? At least 50% of the time you're going to be wrong. In my case, it's probably a lot more. So I have a net gain of apologizing early. Anyway, that was the first lesson. We have a few other ones to go to. Anyway, my mom got into Auschwitz. The men and women were separated. And my mom was looking at all the people who were there, and they were skin and bone. Just to give you an example, I weigh about 153. My dad was 1 inch smaller than me, and when he got out, he weighed 85 pounds. So you can see that people didn't last very long. My mom figured that out pretty early. She looked at the people and she'd ask them, how long you been here? Oh, 6 months, 9 months. They were skin and bone. So when she looked at the food that they got every day, just a little bit of watery soup from potatoes, maybe a little bread, she knew that she could not last very long if that's all the food she would get. She was a businesswoman right from the get-go. She said, I got to figure out a way to do some deals to where we can export food and medicine to survive. So she started talking to her friends and all that stuff. And nobody could come up with an idea of how you're going to get extra food and energy. One day it popped in her mind. She was walking by a barracks, and there were Gentiles in the camp too. And the Gentiles had privileges where they could receive mail and packages from relatives. They didn't tell them they were in concentration camp, but people thought they were in a work camp. So these people would get presents from the relatives, and one girl was crying. She says, can you imagine? My parents sent me this beautiful dress and shoes. What am I going to do with it in Auschwitz? That got her entrepreneurial thing. She said, if I can figure out to take that and trade it with somebody, the guards, maybe we can do some deals. So she started thinking that way. And then there were girls that were working where they take your jewelry. They take your wedding ring. They take the teeth out of gold out of your teeth. They take anything you have of value, and they put it in big piles. And these guys with machine guns standing there watching you. So she thought, geez, if I can get my hands on some of these diamonds, I know we could buy off some of these guards. So she went up to the girls and said, listen, if you can get us a few diamonds, I'll get you anything you want. They said, Manya, are you crazy? The guy's standing there with the guns? And what are you going to do with the diamond in Auschwitz? She said, that's my job. I'll take care of that. You just get me the diamonds. So anyway, a girl came over to her one day and said, you know what, Manya, I think I can do it. She said, good, let's make a deal on that. So they made out a deal that if they got a diamond, she would get him so much in food and whatever. So she said the next big riskiest thing, she had to figure out which guard she was going to try to buy off. Now, it's a pretty risky business trying to buy off a guard. So she thought about it, and she was a tremendous judge in people. She could look at somebody and read them right away. That was her strength as a person. Anyway, she said for a couple of weeks, she watched all the guards, and she made candidates who she thought she could do something with. And she said what she looked for was an older person, an older man, and she looked for how they kept their uniform. If you're not too enthusiastic about being in a concentration camp, you wouldn't be polishing your shoes and looking sharp with your uniform. She says the young, red gung-ho guy, she obviously wouldn't get near. But she located a few guys that were older, Their uniforms were very sloppy. And the other quality she looked for, did any of them have any humanity in them, some tendency to show some goodwill towards the prisoners. And she would watch the guard, and there was one guy that when the other guards weren't away, they'd let the people slough off a little bit, give them a break. So she figured this guy was probably the most sympathetic towards the people, to the prisoners. And so she approached him one day and she said, let me ask you, do you have a wife? He said, yes. He says, does she like diamonds? And the guard looked at her and he says, well, what woman doesn't? She says, well, I think I could get you a diamond. He says, great. So she told the girl, give me the diamond. So she said she gave him the diamond. She didn't ask for anything in return. She didn't want to take the risk. She just figured on the goodwill. The next day, he says, Manya, you can't believe how happy I made my wife with that diamond. She says, oh, I'm very happy. He said, I want to do something for you. I said, oh, okay. So, like it wasn't expected, you know. So he said, what can I do for you? She said, well, food is always a situation, but we also have some need for medicine, like garlic. Garlic in Eastern Europe is like penicillin. The Russians used to use it instead of penicillin. As you all know, it's got great properties, and I have studied garlic, and I'm just amazed at all of the healing properties that garlic has. So Beppy told me that Manya made the market in garlic. Anytime somebody was sick, you get garlic. So people were willing to trade their food for garlic to fight off the disease. My dad told me the same story. He said, you know what? I want you to remember that you never smoke, not for all the reasons you shouldn't, but for this reason. He said the addiction is so bad that people in concentration camp would trade their food for cigarettes. He said, I used to watch these guys do it. I just couldn't believe this. Why would you trade food for cigarette? The food is what you need to survive. He says, Hugo, I need it more than the food. So he said, for that reason alone, you should never smoke, because you don't want to ever be addicted to something like that in a situation where you are willing to sacrifice indirectly your life by trading the food you need to live to have a smoke. He said, it's direct. He says, but cigarettes was like a currency. If you had a cigarette, you could get by. So anyway, my mom made the market in different things, medicine, food. And one day, my dad got the shock of his life. This was just amazing. He said he got back from a very hard day at work, and he was sitting there with his buddy in the evening, and all of a sudden, a guard started looking at him. He said, whenever a guard started looking at you, it was never good news, because they'd take you in an extra work day, you could send you to the chamber, whatever. Never anything good came out of it. And he told his friend, he says, don't look up now, but I think we're in trouble. And the guy says, well, what's going on? He says, well, this guard keeps looking at us. And he goes, oh, they were both worn out. So he sees the guard, he keeps looking down, he sees the guy's boot coming, and he said his heart was just pounding, and he goes, is your name Hugo? And my dad says, yes. He says, oh. He pulls out his briefcase. He says, I have a present from your wife. So my dad says, my wife? You know, he figured maybe it was a trick or a joke or something. And he says, yes. He said, I have some food for you. My dad says, oh, okay. He pulls out the food. He didn't know what to expect. He accepts the food. And the guard says, by the way, what is your Hebrew name? And he said, my Hebrew name is Chaim. And he says, good. He said, do you mind if I ask you why you need my Hebrew name? He says, well, Manya's rule is if we are to deliver, we have to have proof of delivery. And the way she asks it is she's got to have your Hebrew name. So that's the code. And my dad says, oh my God, he couldn't believe it. He said, so the guy walks off, it was very nice, walks off, and he says to the guy next to him, and the guy says, your wife pulled this? How could? He said, there's only one person in the whole Auschwitz that could get away with this, and that's Manya. So that'll give you a little indication of what it was like. Anyway, there was terrible things going on. The worst of it is that it was freezing cold, and they would be just in regular clothes, and they would have roll call in the morning, and sometimes it'd take an hour, and they would just stand there. Some people didn't have any shoes, so you had to keep moving your feet because you're barefoot in the snow, and you can imagine how cold that was. But anyway, there was one experience that stands out that was the trigger that really taught me about how powerful the mind is. And my dad was talking about the death march. And if you look at the next slide, you can see that this is not my dad, but this is survivors of Auschwitz. He weighed 85 pounds. He was 5'7". So they went on a death march. And the rules in the death march is you get a couple of slices of bread. It's really one slice, but it's about as thick as the average slice today. One slice of bread. You marched 24 hours, no breaks. The water you get from scraping the snow off the guy in front of you, off his back, and there was no breaks. The snow was halfway up your knees, so it was about right here. And if you got weak and you buckled to where the snow hits your knees, they beat you. If you didn't get up, they'd shoot you. So he said you really had to make sure that no matter how exhausted, how depressed, how tired you had to be, you can imagine. Just think if we had to march sub-zero weather today, 24 hours in the condition we are, it'd be pretty tough to do. But in that condition, it's almost impossible. So I said, Pa, how did you make that? How did you do it? He said, you know, I can't really tell you how, but there's one thing that I learned from that experience is there's a power in the mind that we don't understand. It creates energy. It literally can create energy. And he said, where I figured that out is, he said, the most important thing for me was not to have my knees touch the snow because I didn't want the beating, and I was afraid if they beat me and I went down, I wouldn't be able to get up, and then obviously they shoot you. So he says the thing that I concentrated on is whenever I picked up my foot and I locked my knee, I made sure it was locked, so I was so tired I would fall down. I would just lock my knee, and then I could take the next step and lock the knee. So he said, I focused on that so hard because I knew if I didn't do it, I'd be dead. He said, now, when you think about something that where you're facing death, you don't think about other things. You just think, I gotta stand up, I gotta keep moving, I can't let my knee. He says, well, you think about that for hours and hours and hours, and all of a sudden, you get this energy. And I said, well, how do you get that energy? He says, I don't know. But he says the mind has something that can create its own energy. And so that's all I did. And we started off with a large field, and just a small group of people made it. But I was lucky enough to be able to do it. And so I got my first cue about how powerful the subconscious mind was from that, and it never left my mind. I wonder what it is about the mind that gives it that kind of energy and power. And that has driven me for over 50 years. I've been studying the subconscious mind as much as I study the market, because there is something there which I have discovered, and I learned it even by accident, which we'll talk about later. But think about the focus. Think about if you have the sun and you have a magnifying glass, as we all did as kids, and then it burns the paper. If you just have the sunshine on the paper, it doesn't burn. But when you magnify it and you focus it, it creates the energy to burn the paper. That's the best explanation I can give you of what happens when you focus on your goals and what you want to achieve. If it becomes so obsessive with you that you become focused, you can literally accomplish anything. And I mean that literally. And so I learned a great deal of that, and I had a personal experience which I'll tell you in a little while, and it'll show you how it actually works. But anyway, things were going from bad to worse from both of my parents, and my dad was down to the point where he couldn't go anymore. He didn't have any shoes, and that was a terrible thing when there's snow. And he didn't have much energy, and he went to visit a friend of his who was dying in one of the barracks. When you got typhus or any kind of disease, they didn't bother gassing you. They just throw you in a barracks, and then you eventually die, and then they gas you. Or then they cremate you. So my dad went to see his friend, and his friend said, "You go. They're going to have another death march." He said, "You can't consider going on there. You don't have any shoes. You're weaker now. I'm dying. Why don't you stay here, hide underneath the hay, and we'll both die together?" My dad thought about it. Well, he wasn't interested in the dying, but he thought maybe if he could hide in the hay until everybody left, because they were liquidating the camp because the Americans were coming, they wanted to move away. He said maybe he could get by with not being detected. He said, "You know what? I'm going to hide under the hay. I'm going to hide under you. And what you do is I'm not going to say anything and you don't say anything, but when you know the guards are gone, let me know so I can come up." He said, "Great." So my dad said that he lay there. They're making roll call, and they take roll call, and everybody had a number on their arm, and that's how efficient the Germans were. They kept track of everybody. They had to have proof that that person was gone. So they had roll call, and they reported, "One man is missing." They said, the guy said, "Such the Lager," that means search the barracks. So my dad says, here they're coming with bayonets. They're poking it in the hay. He's laying there, and he says the bayonet went like this, and they went underneath him and over, and he was just laying there waiting to get hit. And they didn't hit him, and so they left. My dad says, oh, he was so shook up. He said, "Boy, I can't believe that they missed me, you know." Anyway, they report back that they couldn't find him. He says, "Do it again." He said, "Oh," he said, "to go once is one thing, but to be able to escape that twice." He said he was just laying there waiting to get poked. And he said, actually, one of them got so close, he thought he felt it. He said it got so close. But he said again, they didn't find him. And he said he laid there for 3 days because his friend never gave him a signal that the guards were clear. So my dad figured that the guy didn't give him the signal because they probably planted a guard there. So he couldn't say anything. So after he said it was there about 3 days, he went in his pants, urinated, defecated. He was just laying there. He couldn't move because he thought there was a guard in the barracks. Then all of a sudden he heard fighting and gunshots and all kinds of commotions, and he heard somebody say, "Brothers, we are free." The Americans had broken through the camp, ran off the Germans, and they were free. And so he crawled out from, some guy came in and helped him crawl out of the hay, and then he saw why his friend didn't tell him. His friend was unconscious. So he was laying there in all of this because his friend was unconscious and couldn't give him the signal. It's a good thing that the American Army broke through. So his friend finally gained consciousness, and he said that they used to work as a team together. Each one of them would hold each other up so they could walk. That's how weak they were. And the Americans were just the most generous troops that he'd ever come across. They took care of him. They took him to a hospital. They gave him food. They nursed him back to health. And eventually, he was strong enough and nourished enough to go back to Holland. The American Army gave him some money to go on the trains, and he finally ended up with Holland. Now, this is an interesting story, because when he got to Holland, he went to the Red Cross. And the reason people go to the Red Cross is if you're looking for a relative, you would sign your name, and then if people are looking for you, they can find you by looking up at the Red Cross. Well, my mom had gotten out first, and she went to the Red Cross, and she didn't find any member of her family that had signed in, so she figured that they were all gone. And so she figured, well, if everybody's gone, there's no point in putting my name down. So she didn't put her name down. So my dad gets there. He looks through the register. Nobody's signed in from the family. He figured they're all gone. So he goes back to Holland. He's walking down the street one day, and he sees this milkman pushing a cart up a hill, and it was kind of an older man. He said, you know, I think I'll go help this guy push the cart up the hill. So he's pushing on the cart, and he's look over to the guy, and he goes, my God, it was my old milkman. So they shook hands and really were glad to see each other. And he says, you know, Hugo, what is an amazing miracle is that you and your wife both survived this ordeal. My dad put his head down. He says, no. He said, I'm sorry to tell you that my wife didn't make it. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, I went to the Red Cross. She didn't have signed in. He says, no, she made it. No, my dad says, no, I just checked. He said, I saw her yesterday. My dad says, you saw her yesterday? He says, yeah. He says, she's living right up the street. But my dad says he just couldn't believe it. So he said he did have a little bit of money left. So he went and bought some flowers. He went over there, knocked on the door, and there she was. So anyway, that's how my parents got reunited. And then they went and they went looking for me and my brother. And they were both on bicycles. But I want to ask you a question. What do you think was the most important quality for surviving the concentration camp? Anybody have any thought? What do you think is the most important thing? Well, let me give you an example. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist, Jewish psychiatrist, an intern in Auschwitz. And he said that he saw it was a great opportunity to study people to what made them react under those extreme circumstances. And he was on the same death march as my dad. They didn't know each other, but he was marching along, and one of his friends said, he said, I hope, and it's on page 73 of Man's Search for Meaning. He said, I was on the death march, and a friend of mine said, I hope our wives are doing better than we are. He said that got him to thinking about his wife. And he said he thought about her so much, and it was so focused on her, that he could actually feel that she was there, and they were actually literally carrying on a conversation. He didn't even know whether she was alive, but he said he absolutely felt. And I want to read you what he said. A thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it's set in song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom of so many thinkers. The truth that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which a man can ever achieve. So in that epiphany, he realized, which all of the great thinkers have said, that love is the single most powerful force, and it is the thing that he said allowed you to be in bliss even in a desolate place as Auschwitz. Now that really got my attention, and I asked my dad, what do you think was the secret of survival? He said, you know, I didn't realize it at first, but I realized it later, that it hit me what makes people survive. He said, I'll give you an example. They captured a bunch of young Russian soldiers. They threw them into Auschwitz, and he said these guys were just strong young men. In addition to that, they were used to the cold weather. They'd lay a blanket down, go to sleep in the snow. And he said to these guys, boy, he said he was on a place where they were building an airport. He had to dig ditches, and he said the ground was wet. And you know, when you go to shovel and pick dirt up that's wet, it's doubly heavy. And he said he could barely pick it up and move it over, and these guys would be going like this. So he was talking to one of them, he said, yeah, you guys are going to last forever. He said to his shock, they died off first. And he got to thinking about that. How could these young, and he says he finally figured it out. After 6 months, they're all skin and bones. They're just like him. They have no better chance of survival than anybody else. And they were young, and many of them didn't have wives or girlfriends or something. So they didn't have the real desire to live. He said, all we thought about is we talked about our wives and our children, and it was our great hope to see them, and that's what kept us going. And he said one day he was talking to a friend of his, and a friend said, you know what, Hugo? I finally figured it out. My dad looked at him and said, what'd you figure out? He said, I figured out what's going on. They don't care whether we live or die. What they do is they have so many people coming in, they take us, they get as much labor as they can, they don't waste any money by giving us food, and then they throw us in the gas chamber. So that's our fate. As soon as we can't work anymore, we're gone. My dad says, well, I know that. I mean, you just have to look around, see that. And he said, so I figure, why go through this? Get up at 4:30, 6 o'clock in the morning in the snow and the cold and the whipping and all that. Who needs it? My dad says, well, you can't think that way. Because if you think that way and you give up the will to live, then you're going to die. He says, I don't care. This is it. I'm out. I don't want any more. So my dad tried to talk to him, but he was pretty depressed, and he said, yeah, okay. So anyway, next morning he was dead. So that's the lesson there. People were like living on vapors. The only thing that kept them alive is love. The idea that maybe one day they would get to see their children, their wives, their loved ones. So that is a confirmation to me what Viktor Frankl talked about, the greatest achievement that any of us can accomplish in a life. It's not how much money we make, how big the business is, how great an accomplishment it is. It's the ability to love. We know that love is the greatest force. The Bible talks about that. We also know that hate is the greatest destruction. And so you have to guard as to what you're going to pursue in your life. Anyway, my mom and dad got together. They came at the orphanage to pick me up. And when they were walking up the driveway, a little girl that I was playing in the front yard with, she said, you know, Arnold, I heard people talking, those people walking up the driveway, that they're your parents. I looked at them, I said, nah, they're not. What happened is, as people were coming to pick up their kids, all the kids would run to their parents hoping it would be their parents. And I did too, but after a while, when it's not your parents, after a while you get discouraged, and I just couldn't believe that it was my parents. So I said, no. Then all of a sudden, somebody said, Arnold, come inside. And she said, see, you watch, that's your parents. So I looked at them and I thought, well, okay. So I walked in there. My dad was sitting there, my mom was sitting there, the lady was sitting there, and he looks at me and he says, that's not Arnold. And I went, oh. And my mom says, no, the lady says, no, that's Arnold. That's Arnold. My mom says, just a second. She looks at me, she looks into my eyes, she says, that's Arnold. My dad goes, you sure? I mean, he was bigger than he was when we dropped him off. I mean, how could you say it? She says, that's Arnold. That's it. Okay. So that night, we stayed at a place, and my dad went to put me to bed, and I said to him, can you pick me up? And he goes, what? I want to sing goodnight to the sun and turn off the light switch. So he said he knew that it was Arnold because before the war, he used to pick me up. I would sing a song, Dag Zonnetje, means good night, sun, and then I would get to flick the light switch off. So he said that convinced him that I was his son, but he said it was really hard to believe that I was, you know. Anyway, we went to visit my brother. He was on the farm, and I was on the back of the bike of my, I think it was my mom, I'm not sure. Anyway, so we pull up to the farm, and my brother's standing there in the drive, kind of a dirt road, like a driveway, and I saw him, and he was looking, he had a pail, he was going to feed some of the animals, and I saw him, and I just jumped off the bike, and I ran, and we hugged, and I can tell you that was the happiest day of my life at that point, because I missed him so much. My mom said he had a fake name, his name was Zygmunt, but they changed it to Fritz. I said, I want to see Fritzy, we're going to see Fritzy, don't worry, don't worry. But anyway, it was really a great reunion. And so the family got together. My folks went back into business after the war. My dad turned his gold that he had hidden and turned it back into money. The other thing he did, which was a great thing, is he hid his machines. And after the war, there weren't too many machine companies around. So he got into the business right away. He had very little competition because there weren't many machines around. And so they built a profitable business in 4 years. But my dad's dream was to go to America. And so no matter what happened, he decided that he was going to go to America, and he finally was able to do it. And there's a lesson that my dad taught me, and the interesting thing was that he never talked about it. But my mom was telling me one time, you know, it was very difficult to get into America. We had to hire a broker, and we had to pay him 100,000 guldens, which was, that time was, you know, maybe $75,000, $50,000, $75,000, maybe even as much as $100,000. And the reason was that you couldn't get into America unless you had a sponsor who was willing to be financially responsible for you. So this guy built this business. He would get rich people in America to say, look, I can bring this family over. I've checked them out. They're financially sound. They'll pay me a fee. I'll split it with you, and then we can bring the families in. So my dad agreed to do it. So by chance, he found out that we did have an uncle, a great uncle here. And so he wrote the uncle and he said, would you be willing to sponsor my family? And the uncle says, yeah. All you had to do was fill out a form, $2.50, and he could sponsor us. So now he had a dilemma. He said, an ethical dilemma. He had made a deal with the guy to pay him 100,000 gulden. And so he went to the guy and he said, listen, I didn't know I had an uncle, but I wrote to the uncle, he's willing to sponsor me. Would you be willing to take $50,000? You don't have to do anything. And that saves me $50,000 when I go to a strange country. And the guy said, Hugo, we made a deal, and I expect you to pay me all of it. So my dad says, okay. So I didn't learn about this until I was in high school. My mom told me about it. I went up to my dad and said, how in the hell could you give this guy the whole $100,000? That's ridiculous. He didn't do anything. He said, Arnold, it was my dream to send you to the greatest country in the world so that you would have a great future. And how could I send you to that country if you went there with a bad name by a man who didn't keep his word? So that's why I did it. And I thought, wow. I thought at that time, well, I'm not sure I would have done that, but anyway, appreciate it. But as I grew older, and as I grew up and learned how important your word is and your integrity, I became to appreciate it more and more. And now, of course, I realized what an important example he set for me. So I walked up to my mom, I said, Mom, what would you have done? She said, here's the way I do it. I tell him, $50,000, you don't take him, I kick him where it hurts. So that's the difference between the philosophy. But anyway, at that point, I kind of agreed with her. But I wouldn't agree with her today. It was a great lesson. And you know what was interesting? He never talked about it. I never even knew that happened. But it was that quiet integrity that he had. And I'm going to show you something later that really had a profound impact. But anyway, we moved into, they kept telling me about America, and it's going to be wonderful, and we don't have to worry about being Jewish, and everything is going to be great. So we move into this kind of a poor neighborhood, typical kids, and my mom, since it's America, she wants us to be dressed up to the hilt. So she got us a suit with short pants, Bermuda, with long socks, and a shirt and tie. And so I went to school that way. Now, you can imagine how well I was received by all the other kids. The first day, my brother and I got into 3 fights because people were making fun of us and pushing us, and we were the joke. So I went home. Now, the good news was that my brother grew up on a farm, and he was as strong as an ox. And he didn't like fighting. But if somebody messed with him, he would, of course, fight back, and we didn't have any choice. So he was so strong, he didn't realize how strong he was. So the first kid to push the fight, he hit him. The kid went down so hard, everybody was just shocked. And then my brother didn't follow up on it. He just wanted to get out of it. Well, I was fighting with the kid. I wasn't really fighting. The kid was fighting with me, and I was on the ground, and Zig sees me across the hall. He comes running out there, and he hits this kid, just almost knocked him down. So after a while, when we went back to school, the kids kind of respected my brother's strength, didn't mess with us too much, and I begged my mom to buy us a pair of Levi's so I could just go to school, to go to school like normal kids. And my mom says, "What? You don't need that. These are beautiful clothes. What's the matter with you?" And so my aunt, who was there, who always lived in America, she said, "I'm going to buy him Levi's." Went to school, Levi's. I was so happy. Never so happy to have a pair of Levi's. Anyway, one of the obsessions that I had when we moved in the neighborhood, it was a tough neighborhood anyway, but I was really felt bad about how skinny I was and how weak I was and how I couldn't do anything athletic. And it really became an obsession to overcome my physical handicap. And so my brother, who was very strong, one of the strongest kids in the school, the coach had him climbing rope. He was a gymnastic coach. And rope climbing at that time was an event in gymnastics. It used to be in the Olympics. And so part of the gymnastic team climbed a rope, and it was a speed event. You start from a sitting position and you climb up. And so my brother, the coach ran 6 gym classes through, and he said he would try to find a good rope climber, and he picked the kids who were the strongest in the class, who did the best, and that's how he developed this rope climbing team. So my brother was right in there, and he got him to start climbing the rope, and Zig says, "You know, Arnie, the rope climb might really make you strong. Why don't you come in the gym and I'll introduce you to coach and you start climbing?" So I said, "Okay." So I walked into the gym and he's, "Coach, this is my brother Arnold." He said he wants to be a rope climber. And the coach looks at me. He goes, "Okay, we'll start you off climbing the rope." Well, I could barely do 2 or 3 strides and I couldn't do it. So anyway, the coach told me if I work out hard and I become good at rope climbing, I can go on to other events. Well, 2 years later, I was still climbing the rope and never got on the other event. But after a while, a couple of years, I started getting a little stronger. And one day, all the young guys were sitting around talking about, you know, what they were going to do as a career. One guy was going to football, and the other playing tennis, basketball. And Van Den Berg, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I'm going out for the rope climb." And there was a guy there who was a bodybuilder, strong kid. He wanted to go out for the rope climb too. And he says, "You're going out for the rope climb? You got to be kidding me." And I was, got my ego involved and got all upset. And I figured I'd been climbing for 2 years, and he'd never climbed the rope before. So I figured I should be able to beat him. I was doing a little better. So we got into the gym. All my buddies were there. It was a big contest. And this guy beat me so bad. I was only halfway up when he was already at the top. I was so humiliated, embarrassed, I thought I was going to cry. But anyway, I went home and I was sitting about that, and I thought, I've been climbing for 2 years for 2 hours a day, and here's the guy that walks off the street and he beats me. How am I ever going to compete? And I thought, well, maybe I ought to give it up. And then a thought came to me. It just flashed in my head. Why would you give it up? You wanted to get stronger. You're getting stronger. And I thought, that's right. Even if I can't compete, I'm getting stronger. So I'm going to stay with it. So that's the first lesson. Never, ever give up, no matter how grim it is, because the next year I made the team. And that was a big step just to make the team. The only problem was, the only reason I made it, there was 5 guys in the event, and they only had 4 that applied. So the coach let me compete. But I literally was an embarrassment to the team. What they did is when you start the rope climb, everybody yells, "Pull, pull, pull, pull." And then, after a few seconds, the guy gets up there. Well, to me, they pull, 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 and everybody stopped, and I was still climbing. So it was pretty embarrassing for the team, but the coach really encouraged me. And I want to say to any of you who are teachers here, you can't believe the influence you have on a kid's life if you do nothing else but encourage them and believe. Emerson says the first step in helping somebody is believing in them. And that was so important. That's my coach there. I kept in touch with him all his life, and I had the pleasure of spending the last week of his life with him in his home, and we recounted all the good times that we had. But here's the thing. The next year, I went up to the coach and I said, Coach, I said, what can I do to improve my time? He said, you know, Arnold, it's really interesting that you asked that question because I just came up with an idea that I think is going to make a big difference. And I said, okay, what is it? He said, well, they're developing a new technique on the rope climb. Usually the average guy climbs like this. This is a technique where you lay down and you're just pulling the rope all the way back. You just pull it all the way down instead of here so it blocks you. And it really improves your time. The only thing is you got to develop a complete set of different muscles. He said, if you are willing to do that and learn that technique, and I'll help you, you can make a lot of progress. I was really excited. I said, well, how do I learn that? And he said, well, there's no film or pictures. Just go down and watch this guy who uses the technique. It was a school in our city, Venice High School. I got all excited. I took the bus down. I got there 2 hours before the event started because I didn't want to miss it. And I'm sitting there all excited. Finally, the rope climb starts. And this guy didn't show up. And I'm sitting there, I was just so disappointed. It was almost like I was in a different state of mind. All of a sudden he comes in, he was late, he pulls up, sits up his stand, sits down there, shoots up a 25-foot rope in 4.6 seconds, and I'm sitting there, wow, I was just in a trance. And a thought came to me, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be the next champion. Now, if I was in my right mind, I would have not said that, but I was in that emotional state, so I was so excited about it. So all the way on the bus, people were looking at me on the bus. I'm going, people were looking at me. I'm sorry, you know. But anyway, I was just afraid that I would lose the technique because I didn't have a picture. So I'd go to bed at night, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat. I thought, God, if I forget how I did it, we can't train that way. So I'd get up in the mirror at 3:30 in the morning, and I would be moving my legs, and I would be moving. I just feel like I was in the rhythm. And then I'd go to sleep, and I'd sleep all night. Well, I did this for about 6 or 9 months. And then one day, I wake up just feeling powerful. I bounced out of bed, and I thought, first thing that came to my mind, I'm going to break my record today. So I just couldn't stand to go through my classes. It was just horrible. And I couldn't wait to get to the gym. And I caught the coach. I said, Coach, I am feeling like I'm going to break my time. He said, good, warm up and we'll get going. So I warmed up. I sat down and I took off. And I felt like I was floating. It used to be such a struggle. I was just smoothly sailing up that rope. And by the time I got to the top, it used to reach and barely get it. And I could almost hit it with my elbow. And I thought, wow. So I'm hanging out there 20 feet. Coach, what was the time? He said, he's playing with the watch. He says, come on down. So I come down. I said, what's the matter? He said, Arnie, this is so good. I thought there was something wrong with my watch. I said, there's nothing wrong with your watch. I'm going to do it again. Bam! I did it 10 times in a row. It was such a big breakthrough that nobody in the gym could believe it. And I said to him, you know what, Coach? I have a strange feeling. And he kind of looks at me suspiciously like, what's he going to come up with? And I said, I have a feeling I'm going to win the league next year. And he goes, Arnie, look, you did great. This was a great time. But, you know, there's 5 guys in each team. And, you know, there's a lot of guys ahead of you. And I was a little embarrassed by it. And I said, yeah, you're right. I walked away. I said, bullshit, I'm going to do it. So I climbed all summer. Most people didn't climb off season. I climbed all summer. I worked on the technique. I perfected it. By the time the season started, I was first man. And everybody in the league was a little bit faster than me, but it wasn't that much difference. And so, you know, when I talked with my friends and said, I'm going to win the league this year, they said, well, Arnie, this guy's faster and this guy's faster. I said, well, I don't know, but when I get into meet, I'm going to beat the guy. So every meet I got, I won first place, I beat the guy, and there was only one guy left to beat in the league. And that was the guy, at that time it was a 20-foot rope. I was climbing 5.6, and he was climbing 4.3. Now, 0.3 of a second doesn't sound a lot, but 1/10 of a second is a lot in 100 meters. You can imagine what 0.3 of a second is in 20 feet. It's like night and day. So I walked into the meet, and the guy was sitting there, the guy who was the champion. And you line up, and the last guy, the best guy goes last, so I was seated second to the last. And the guy was sitting there almost bored. He had no competition. I was his best competition. That wasn't much. So I sat down, I grabbed the rope, I got a terrific feeling. I sat down and I hit 4.3. I broke my time from 5.6 to 4.3. He kind of woke up. He was a little stunned. He went up, he was so shook. We traded places. He did 4.6 and I did 4.3. So I won the meet. And then when it came to the championship, we both tied for first. And after that, I broke the school record, I broke the league record, I won the league 3 years in a row. So after I graduated from high school, I ran into some real difficulties and got into a very depressed state. I went through a divorce, I got married my high school sweetheart, and we were married about 4.5 years. We went together about 4.5 years. And we broke up, and that really set me into serious depression. And I was in that depression for a long time. So I went to see a psychiatrist, and we got along great. He was a terrific guy. I don't know, I hate to think of what my life would be like if it wasn't for my coach and for this psychiatrist. But he explained to me my problems in depression and so on and so forth. And I told him I wanted to be a money manager, and he said, you know, Arnie, the story you told me about the rope climb is just the most fascinating story I've heard in athletics, because I study sports psychology. And the techniques that you told me you used is what we would recommend if you were training under our sports psychology program. You repeated that you were going to win, you did the repetition, you visualized it in your mind, and you programmed your subconscious mind, and that's what happened. And I said, really? I didn't even know what a subconscious mind was. I said, you mean to tell me it can do all those things? And then I said, you know, my dad said something about concentration camp. There's something to the mind that made him survive the death march. He says, that's exactly the same thing. The power came from the subconscious mind. I said, my God, if it can do all these things, I'm going to spend my whole life studying it, in addition to the market, of course. So anyway, that's what I've done, and that's what got me to thinking about it. So the lessons that I learned from the sports helped me to gain the confidence that I could do it in the investment field. And he said to me, and I got chills right on my right arm, whenever I hear a truth, my right arm chills up. And he said, you know, Arnold, if you take the same principles that you applied to gymnastics and you applied it to your business is going to be successful the same way. It's the same principle. As soon as he said that, I knew it. I just felt it. I went home. I was living in a studio apartment. I cleared out my apartment, threw everything out, took all the pictures of the wall, put all my stock market data and charts, moved my desk in the middle of the room, and I said, that's it. I'm starting my business. This was 3 months before the bottom. I'd been thinking about it for a long time. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't even think about how I was going to do it. I'm going to do it. So I went out to lunch with a client of mine, a friend of mine who was from the insurance business, and I told him my idea about starting the business. He said, Arnie, where's your office going to be? I said, oh, I don't have an office. I live in a studio apartment. I could barely pay the rent for that. He says, I can't have an office. He says, Arnie, you can't go into the money management business and not have an office. I mean, where are you going to meet people? I said, I'll meet them at their office or meet them for lunch. He said, no. Let's go back to my office. I said, why? He said, I really believe you're going to do this and you're going to be good at it, but I want you to have an office. So let's go back. Let's figure out what it costs to start an office, and I'm going to lend you the money. Now, this guy was Robert Phillips, and he literally put me into business. I owe him a great debt. And what he did, we went back to the office, and I said, well, the chair would cost this much, or this much. I tried to keep it down because I didn't want him to think I was taking advantage of him. Anyway, it turned out to be about $2,500, which is about $15,000 in today's money, because it was 50 years ago. And we went to his office, and I called a friend of mine up who was an accountant. I said, guess what? I've got enough money to start, get into an office. If you'd like to share it, he had the same idea. Why don't we partner up and we'll share the rent, and then we could share the space. So he's great. We went out there, and we got our own office, and that's kind of how I got started. But before that, I forgot to mention, I started my business with a partner, with a guy that was a partner. And I took the money, scraped everything I could get together, borrowed some, went into the business. It only lasted about 6 months because we never got along about the philosophy of everything. So I lost half of my business, and I took whatever was left, and with the money that Bob Phillips gave me, I started the company. Altogether, it was less than $3,000, or about $3,000. And I don't mind telling you, it took a long time, because it's kind of hard to build a business when you don't have credentials, you don't have an education, you don't have a lot of money, and you don't have any clients. So that's not a good way to start a business. And I can tell you, I didn't have a 5-year cash flow plan, because I didn't even know what that was. But anyway, that's the way I got started. Now, I wanted to talk about overcoming adversity. Oh, let's go back to the goal setting. You know, I got an idea from Mary Baker Eddy. That's it. Mary Baker Eddy was the founder of Christian Science. And I've been fascinated by this woman for many years because her teachings is just incredible. She believed in the power of the mind, and of course she attributed to faith in Jesus, and I can certainly understand that. Anyway, she had this idea about setting goal, and I thought this is a terrific way. When you go to apply in a vending machine, what you do is the first thing you got to do is you got a lot of choices. You got 25 or 30 choices. So for those of you who are planning your career, the first thing you got to decide is which one do you want? The most important thing is what is it that you want that you are willing to make a total commitment to, a completely focused life where everything gets subordinated except the essentials to make this happen. It's not just a matter of pushing the button, it's what it is you want to do. The second thing you got to do when you decide what you want is what do you have to do? You have to pay the price. You can't just put half of the money in, because no matter how hard you work during that halfway, you don't get anything. You either pay the whole price or you get nothing. So that's the second point in doing a goal, is you got to be total to will go the distance and to go the price. And the third thing you have to do is just push the button and you get what you want. So the secret to setting goals is to understand that. Now, I was giving a talk on this subject to college students 38 years ago. I sent Dave the transcript, which he's welcome to share with any of you who are interested. But I was really struggling how to explain to people how to get that image into their mind. And I struggled with it for several weeks. And I just said, I'm just going to let it go. And I woke up one morning, and this was truly a profound, life-altering experience, because I finally realized how the subconscious mind works. Now think about this. Every invention known to mankind was not learned into the classroom. It was after people struggled with something that was not known and was difficult to figure out, and then all of a sudden they got it, well, they were taking a walk or taking a bath or some moment where they weren't thinking about it, and all of a sudden the subconscious put it together. Now, I want to mention to you of how powerful the subconscious is. So I woke up one morning at 3:30, my mind was just clear as a bell, things were buzzing, and I'd like to take a moment to read it. It's going to take me 1 minute and 14 seconds because I've timed it. Remember the thing that governed. Now this was written by the subconscious mind. I only changed a couple of words. And if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't even leave them in there. Remember, the thing that governs success in any field is determination, the ability to see something through to a successful conclusion. Yet this is exactly where most people fail. The average person will get discouraged and quit many times short of one's goal. What is the difference between an individual who doggedly hangs in there against all odds, reason, and hope? It is my belief through personal observation and experience that there's no difference between the individual from a chemical, genetic, or intellectual standpoint. The difference is that the person who's likely to give up at the first sign of hardship does not have a well-defined goal. And if the person does have a goal, they have not impressed it deeply enough in the subconscious mind. They might want it, but not badly enough to the point where they're willing to make an all-consuming, burning desire. Naturally, if it's a weak desire, it'll be sacrificed at the first sign of hardship. Only a deep commitment, a burning desire, and a sacrificial attitude towards that goal will be deep enough to make an impression on the subconscious mind. If that is accomplished along with the faith, the belief that it can be achieved, you will never lack drive of motivation. You will be pulled, not pushed, you will be pulled by a force that will drive you relentlessly towards that goal. You will receive energy you did not know you had. Because of these forces, you and you alone have the power to shape your future. So that is the advantage of using the subconscious mind. Now let me tell you something. People say you work hard. If you have to push yourself to work hard, then it's easy to give up. But if your subconscious is pulling you, you will feel guilty if you don't do what you have to do. Nobody has to think about, geez, I have to eat today, right? It's an instinct. You don't have to push yourself to eat. If you don't eat long enough, you're going to be pulled yourself to eat. So it isn't the hard work that comes from pushing, it's the heart energy that comes from being pulled. And when you feel that's your mission in life and this is why you're here, then you are never going to give up. Because why would you give up something that you know that you're put under this earth for that purpose? That's what it's got to be. And if it does, you'll overcome it. Now, I don't have much more time, unfortunately, but I want to share a couple of things that came to me. I had a very low self-image when I was in high school. I never really did well in school, starting with my first grade and even before that in Hebrew school. I just never could do well. And people liked me in high school, but they didn't think I was too sharp, and I wouldn't have argued with them. Matter of fact, I want to read you what one of my good friends wrote to me in my high school annual. You're about the coolest guy I know, Arnold. Hope will always be buddy. You're kind of dumb, but you're still cool. Always pals. So, you know, when you have that kind of image, it's kind of hard to get over to think of yourself going to college. But anyway, I want to talk about, I'm going to leave a number of things out to be able to close in time, but I want to leave one thing that always bothered me but had a profound influence on my life. And that was the fact that how could this 19-year-old girl risk her life to save me, and how could her father send his daughter on a suicide mission? Well, his father used to risk the whole family. He would hide Jews. He would use his church to move Jews back and forth. So I couldn't figure it out. So one of the first things I asked when I went to the psychiatrist, the doctor's name was Dr. Rameljack, I said, Dr. Rameljack, can you explain why these people would risk their life for people they didn't know? He said, oh, that's very simple. I said, it is? I've been thinking about it for years. He said, here's the way it works. If your life is more important than your principles, you'll sacrifice your principles. If your principles are more important than your life, then you sacrifice your life. Now think about that. The thing that made these people great was their principles. And the reason I want to share this as a lesson, some of you are going to go into corporate America, and you're going to be faced not with a life or death choice, but you're going to be faced with maybe your job, maybe an opportunity to get promoted because they want you to do something that you would not normally do. It's a sacrifice of your principles. And you got to develop the principles in your life that are so strong that you are going to not sacrifice your principles for your job, for an opportunity, for whatever it may be, because that's the thing that creates success, and that's to create character. And that is the most important thing. And so I want to leave you with that thought that even though you may never be, hopefully never be in a position where you have to sacrifice your life for your principle, there will be many times where you may be forced to sacrifice something for that principle, but the truth of the matter is it'll pay off even if you lose on the fact that you sacrifice. Now, one of the most important things that I learned about mental health and psychology and depression. How many of you have ever been depressed? Let me see your hands. A lot of you, right? Some of you may be depressed right now. But let me tell you the one thing that really changed my mind when I saw about the destructive thing about anger and hatred and all of these negative forces. And this is out of the book, Dr. Tush, and he talked about anger. Now look what happened to anger. I was in a 5-year depression because of my anger, and I didn't know it. And so here's the way it works. If you have anger and you express it, like my mom, she was never depressed about that. But if you are overly polite, very nice, maybe afraid to express yourself, then you repress that anger. You still have the anger, you're just depressing it. Now you do that, you build up more resentment. That's why you have to apologize right away so you don't build up more resentment. And then it goes into indirect expression, and that's subconscious. Once your subconscious gets a hold of that, it needs to relieve it. It creates more depression. It creates addiction, compulsive behavior, alcoholism, smoking, gambling, eating disorders, and sickness. You go to any prison, and I would be willing to bet you if you analyze the prisoners, you would find out that 95% of them are there because of their anger caused them to do self-destructive things. Because when you're angry, then you feel guilty, and when you feel guilty, the subconscious mind compensates by creating self-destructive behavior. And when you have self-destructive behavior, then you're on your way down. I want to talk about another thing, how important forgiveness is. You know, I forgave the Germans. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but I had a choice. I was going to continue to hate them and be angry at them and develop all kinds of self-destructive behavior and get into trouble, or I was going to forgive them and live a good life. And after I thought about it for many years, I finally made a decision to forgive the Germans for what they did. And I want to tell you that made a big difference in my life. I learned the important forgiveness. I felt so good about forgiving them, and I realized that for some strange reason, whatever happened in their childhood made them into the evil, and I'm going to show you how that happens. But anyway, I was able to forgive them. I have such an appreciation of the German culture because other than their black mark, they had the greatest musicians, scientists, major contribution in the world. This one segment obviously went off the rails just like we did during slavery in our country. So every country can have a black spot. But here's the way I finally figured out I'm prejudiced. And I give talks to middle school kids, and I tell them, forget about this talk about racism and prejudice and all that. There's only 2 races in the world. There are the people who think right and do the right thing, and you'll find them in every race. They got people. No matter what race you pick, you're going to have some great people. And then you take the same race, and you're going to have some bad people because they're thinking the wrong way. So there is no difference, skin color, Jewish, Christian, whatever. That's not it. It's the way people think. And if you think right, you're not going to do these things. And if you think wrong, it doesn't matter what race you belong to. You're not going to be very good. I have something that I think you'll really like. It's called The Anatomy of a Lie. Now, this is my library, by the way. I believe in self-improvement, and this is my library, and I go beyond that. I have 4 people reading books for me because there's so many good books out there that I want to read, and I pay them to make a kind of a Cliff Note version of the book, so I can go home and read 3 or 4 books in the evening by reading the Cliff Notes and reading the book reports, and I get a lot out of it. And if I think there's a good chapter, I'll go back and read the chapter or maybe read the whole book, but it prevents me from reading a lot of bad books. But anyway, I wanted to tell you an experience that my dad told me. All my life, when I was going through high school, my dad said, you got to read Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. Well, at that time, you know, the book's about that thick, and I wasn't reading much more than this thick. So I never read the book. And so I was struggling with a concept. My favorite author, James Allen, said, a man can reach the pinnacle of success and fall lower than beasts by encouraging the wrong thoughts. Now that really had me stumped for 3 years. I couldn't figure out if you knew all the right things to get up at the high, how could you fall lower than beast? Because you already knew the right way to thinking. And I couldn't figure it out. So one day I'm with my wife at a bookstore, and she was picking out some books for the children. And I was looking, I saw this bookstore, a book case, and it had all blue books, but they were different titles. And I thought, why would they make the same blue book for different books? So I walked over there, and I saw that it was a competitor of Cliff Notes, and they had Cliff Note versions of the classics. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. All of a sudden, I saw the book, Brother Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I said, you know, Pa always wanted me to read this. I'm not interested in reading the whole book, but I'll read the Cliff Notes. So I went to bought the Cliff Notes, and I opened it up. On the third page, a thought struck me that just really stunned me. Because what I found out is Dostoevsky was a writer, and they put him in prison because he was anti-communist in Russia. And he was a writer, and what he experienced in the Russian concentration camp is that the people who held up the best and who adapted the best were the people with character. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. That must have been why Pa wanted me to read it. And so on that third page, and I took his ideas. This is from Dostoevsky. And I took his idea. He had it written out. I put it in a graph so you can follow it. Now listen to this. This is truly amazing because this is the secret to self-improvement, and everybody can gain with it, even on white lies, because the latest neuroscience shows that even a white lie affects your thinking, it confuses you, it affects your brain, and it affects your health because it creates anxiety, and so on and so forth. But we won't get into the details of that, but here's what he said. When you lie, you lose the ability to discern the truth. Now, if you're going to be in business or you're going to make important decisions, if you can't discern the truth, you're going to have bad judgment. You know who people have bad judgment? People who lie a lot. They lose their ability to discern. Not only in yourself, but in others. Having lied, you lose respect for yourself and others. Not respecting anyone, you lose the ability to love. And without love, all that remains are the base pleasures of life. Indulging in all the base pleasures of life, you become morally depraved. And it all started with a lie. Now, you know what makes an evil person? They've shown that the more you lie, the less sensitive you become to it, the bigger your lies become, and the more distorted your mind becomes, and the more distorted your brain becomes, and then you can't tell the difference between good and evil. And you can actually become an evil person, and it starts off with a lie. Now, nobody lies that much to where they all become evil, but there's a lot of grades in between that. So that is why I want to leave this with you. This is such a critical thing. And if you look at the latest research, you will find out the damage it does to your mind. Now, I want to leave you with one more thought that was really profound to me. When I was starting my business, I ended up being about $20,000 in debt because the business wasn't making any money and I was accumulating bills. And that's about $150,000 in today's money. And I was only grossing $8,000, which is about $50,000 in today's money. So I had $150,000 in debt. The $50,000 or the $8,000 wasn't enough to support a wife and 2 kids. And my wife, who is, I can't even begin to tell you about how great she is, but she helped me with everything in my life, including the business. She was doing the books. And she had tears in her eyes. I said, what's the matter? She said, Arnold, I see you working day and night, and every month we get deeper in debt. And I thought maybe I would get a job to help you until the business gets going. I said, no. I just got done with a shrink. And one of the things you learn if the kids don't have any parents, I'm going to be sending them to a shrink, and all the money you make is going to go to the shrink. So you're going to stay at home. I'm going to make it. And I really believe, despite all the odds, that we're going to make it. And she kind of looked at me like, well, she would like to believe that, but, it's kind of hard. So I said, give me one of your checks. So I wrote out a check to Arnold Van Den Berg, $250,000 for something you may like. And you can see when that's written, 1974. So we were going down the street one time, we're driving down the street, and I said, she said, you think you can transfer some money in my account? I'm getting kind of low. I said, you mean to tell me you spent all that money I gave you? She says, oh, I saved that check. I said, you're kidding. She said, no. I said, I'd love to have it. So there it is. But it shows you that when you have a goal, when you believe in it, when you really trust that the universe is going to provide the promises it gave you, you're going to make it. And there was no doubt in my mind. So I would like to recap this. And I have a quote about financial position. And I said, everybody can be broke. I could go broke. But I could never be poor, because being poor is a state of mind. Being broke is just a temporary situation. So it gives you the faith that no matter what happens, you can always make money, because there's money to be made, as my mom showed, even in concentration camp. That's not a good environment to make money, but it's there. So let me summarize the talks we covered. Always apologize first, even if you think you're right. When you're in a dangerous position, you have to take a chance. Once you make a decision, you have to trust that that decision is the right decision for you. There's incredible power of the mind, as my dad proved in the death march. It's important to accept losses. It happens to everybody, and the sooner you accept it, the more you can move on. The importance of developing a principle to help you make important decisions. Learn how to deal with anger. Learn how to forgive. Learn to believe in yourself, and if you don't believe in yourself, you keep on repeating to yourself that you're going to be successful, and your subconscious mind will guide you no matter whether you know how to do it or not. Always work on self-improvement. That should be a lifetime goal, and I can tell you, whatever you do to improve your life will improve everything around you. And I always have a lot of little goals that I'm working on, whether it's my weights or my push-ups or what I'm trying to do, because whenever you reach a goal, it convinces you that you can accomplish what you set out to do. Now, the last thing, the most important thing, is to learn from failure. My first marriage failed. No, the first time my first marriage failed, my first business failed, and my first attempt in gymnastics failed. But out of each of those, I became closer to being successful. And one of the most painful things, other than the war, was when I broke up with my ex-wife, and I was really burdened, and I was really hurt, and I got really depressed. But for those of you who are in relationships, who may be breaking up, who you may have a girlfriend or boyfriend that you may have to break up, let me give you a great quote from Carl Jung, the great psychiatrist. If you are breaking up in a relationship or getting divorced, don't hang on to the one who's leaving, as it prevents you from meeting the one who is coming. So beyond any disastrous breakup, there's always a new beginning. And the more you hang on to the past, the more you block that future. So accept what happens and move on. And finally, the most important thing is work on developing the truth. Because the more truthful you become, even in white lies, the better off your thinking and your life will be. And I'd like to close with Anne Frank's quote, one of my favorite quotes. I collect quotes. I have about 5,000 in my database, and I brought you each a gift. These are my favorite quotes, and I always felt that the best gift I can give to any person is a good thoughts. And there's a lot of good thoughts in this. Anyway, everyone has inside of him the piece of the good news. The good news is that you don't know how great you are, how great you can be, how much you can love, what you can accomplish, and what your potential is. That's from Anne Frank. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dave asked if you still wanted to hang around for questions. I'm willing to hang around as long as you are. So if there's any question, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, sir. By the way, you remember what Dave said, to speak loudly so the tape can hear you, but more importantly, so I can hear you. I'm not wearing my hearing aids.
Okay, so with everything that's happened in your life, do you consider yourself successful? And if you do, how do you define success?
Oh, that's a very good question. The definition of success is whether you reach your goals. So in my goal, I had 3 things I wanted out of life. I never had a family. I didn't have any cousins. I didn't have any grandparents. I didn't have any uncles. I'd be with my buddies and say, we're going over to my aunt's house, uncle's house. I didn't even know what a cousin was. You know, I just didn't know it. So my dream was to have a family. Well, my first marriage failed, but I'm happy to tell you that I've been married for 47 years. I've got 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and just 1 great-grandchild. So I met my goal. My goal was to have a very successful family. The second goal I had was I wanted to be independent in my business. It wasn't really the big goal to have a big business. I wanted to be able to be independent so I didn't have to work for other people. Because of my nature, no matter what job I was on, I never got along that well with the boss. We always seemed to have a difference of opinion. And looking back now, it was probably mostly me, but that was the reality. And that's the reason my partnership broke up. So the main thing is I don't like working for other people, so I wanted to have my business. I've been in business 45 years, so I reached that goal. The third thing I wanted to do is, my goal wasn't to become wealthy, although I am, but I wanted to be financially independent. So no matter whether it was a client that I didn't want to deal with or an employee or whatever it was, I didn't want to have to depend on other people. And my brother made the insight. He said, you know, probably your drive for independence is because as a young kid you had to rely on yourself. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. But it was obviously a quirk of my personality. But in the definition that I define as success, I've reached all of my goals. There's one more goal that I have, and I'm working on that now, and that is a foundation to study the mind, but not only to learn how it works, to be able to take the average person and teach them how to use the mind. Because there is so much that can be done, not only in achievement, but in health. I can tell you things that I have done with people under hypnosis that you may not even believe. But that is not commonly known. The most underutilized function in medicine is not using hypnosis. You know what they can do? People used to go to psychiatrists for 5 years. I did. And my psychiatrist and I became very good friends because I got into hypnosis independently of him, and he got into it, and we started doing experiments. Now, I'll tell you one experiment that is kind of hard to believe, but it works. My wife and I were trying to have a baby, and I couldn't have a baby. So we tried everything. And then a thought hit me one time as I was pondering about it. I said, I'll bet you that I have a mental program against having kids because what I went through as a kid. So I called my buddy, Dr. Rameljack, and I said, how would you like to do an experiment? He said, sure, what do you got in mind? I said, I believe I have a mental block for having a baby, and I would like to do an experiment under hypnosis where they regress you back, And then you say, why do you feel that way? And then you pull it out, and you erase the tape, and you can do it. So he said, great, I've never done it, but let's try it. So the reason I had that feeling is because my mom always told me as I was growing up, whatever you do, if you want to get married, it's okay. Don't ever have any children. This is what I grew up under. And when I was a teenager and she was telling me that, I said, I know why Mom felt that way, but I'm going to have kids. What I didn't realize is she had gotten to me when I was much younger, and I had accepted it subconsciously, but consciously I didn't agree. Well, we went under hypnosis. I think it took no more than 2 or 3 sessions. He found out that when I was very early, my mom had given me this talk about not having babies, and I bought it. So under hypnosis, we removed that. I woke up one time in the morning and my wife was getting so discouraged because she wasn't getting pregnant. I have a feeling you're going to be pregnant next month. The very next month, her first period, she was pregnant. So that is something that hypnosis can do. There's another thing, one more experience I'll show you. I had a friend of mine who was a psychologist, a PhD in psychology and a PhD in statistics. He had a back problem from the time he was a teenager. He'd come into my office, he could never sit still, he'd be stretching, doing all kinds of things. So I cured my wife of a back problem once, and I didn't even know how I did it, but she had terrible, terrible pains one time, picked her up, put her on the bed, couldn't find a doctor, and she was screaming, so I thought, maybe I could try to hypnotize her. So I said, Eileen, I'm going to hypnotize. She said, no, I can't concentrate. I said, you don't need to concentrate, just listen to my voice. So I gave her the induction, and I saw her eyes flutter, and I thought, oh my God, she's going out. I'm really excited. So she went out for about an hour and a half. Then she coming back, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I still haven't got a doctor. I just put her out again. I didn't know what to do. So I put her out again. Put her out for the 3rd time. It was evening. And I said, you know what, Eileen? I'm going to put you out for the night, and then I'm going to take you to the doctor, the emergency ward in the morning. She said, okay. So put her out for the night. She woke me up. She says, you know, Arnold, my back is feeling a lot better. I said, oh, great. It's probably a good night rest. I said, get out of the bed. And so she says, go ahead and try it. She took 3 steps. She never had a problem for 25 to 30 years. So I thought, what could it, I tried to remember what I said. There must have been something I said that was magical, you know, but it wasn't. So one day I was having dinner with a friend of mine. He said, you know, I had a bad back problem, and this guy, Dr. Sarno, he was a back surgeon. He had discovered that the way the subconscious, it uses it as a fuse. So if you put a lot of electrical lights on the Christmas tree, it blows a fuse, right? So what the subconscious does is when you're under a lot of pressure and you're under something you can't face, or you're under a lot of pressure, it creates back pain. Because if you're laying in bed with a bad back, you're not thinking about your problems. So as the mind gets a chance to renew everything, all of a sudden your back clears up. So I thought, that's how it did it. I put Eileen out for a day, and that kind of reworked all the pressure, and the back problem cleared up. Now, the thing that's amazing, if you look at an x-ray on her back, you would go, oh my God, she got to be in a wheelchair. Dr. Sarno did a study where he took people who had great x-rays, and they were in wheelchairs, and there were people who were playing tennis with bulged disc. So he knew that it couldn't be the physical. He quit doing surgery. He only does surgery on 2% of his patients, and those are people in car accidents and so forth. The rest he all cures mentally. So I said to Ken, I'd love to do an experiment on you. You're a psychologist, and you could tell me all that. Let's do the experiment with Dr. Sarno's technique. It's very much similar to hypnosis. So I sent him the book. 3 weeks later, he calls me up. He says, Arnie, you going to be in town? I said, yeah. He said, I'm coming down to LA. I'd like to visit. I said, okay. So first thing in it, I said, I got to ask Ken whether he read the book. I said, hey, Ken, did you ever read that book by Dr. Sarno? He said, oh, that's why I'm here. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm cured. I've been lifting weights. I'm running. And my back pain's gone. It's completely gone. So I thought, wow, he got so excited about it. He went to study in Tibet with the yogis because he knew what the mind could do, and they're the masters at it. And he started a service where he cures people's back pains over the phone and migraines. That's all he does, over the phone. He wrote a book on it. And I talked to him recently. He said that it worked so well he became a marathon runner, and he wore out 2 hips. And he said, in the surgery, he told the doctor, "What time are we done with the surgery?" He said, "Well, after the surgery, I'm going to get up and walk out of the hospital," whenever he got out of the recovery room. And he said he walked out of the hospital, and the doctor just couldn't believe it. He said, didn't feel any pain, it was just fine. So the point is that these are the things that the subconscious can do. Okay, is there any question? Yes, sir.
What is the average day in the life of Arnold Van Den Berg like? What's your average day like?
Day?
What do you do every day?
Oh, I get up in the morning. I need an hour and a half to get ready. I try to meditate for 20 to 30 minutes every day. I don't do it every day, but 3 to 4 days a week. Then I do a half an hour of trampoline work. I have a little mini trampoline. And I discovered that the single best exercise for any person is the trampoline. And the reason is that it's 65% more efficient than running. Because when you go down on the trampoline, your leg goes way down and then it's got to push it up. And so that's going against the force. And so when you're running, you're about 1.5 times the force of gravity. When you're on the trampoline, you're 4 times. So I take this little trampoline, I do a half an hour work almost every day, and I read my emails, and I read some of the news items while I'm on the trampoline because, you can go this and this and this way. And you're just going, after a while, you forget you're on it. So then I got a trampoline in my office, and when I'm on a conference call, and I don't need to do a lot of writing, I get on the trampoline, I put the person on the speaking phone, and I get a half an hour trampoline work in. And then I try to do at least 15 minutes to half an hour of yoga. And I've been in yoga for about 15 years. My daughter became a doctor of Chinese medicine. And so I wanted to be supportive, and I said, I want to be your first patient. So I went there, and she did all these tests on me, and she said, Dad, if you keep going this way, you're going to have every disease known to mankind, degenerative disease. You got to change. So I thought, well, she's enthusiastic, I went along with it. But for 6 months, she would check me out and give me advice. And one night, I had an epiphany. And she said, Dad, if you keep going this way and you don't change, you're going to have some problems. So she said to me, what good is all the money if you're going to end up ill? Now that got my attention. So I said, okay, I'm sold. Tonight I'm going to start on your program. Tell me what I have to do, and I'll follow it, 100%. She said, well, I think the first thing you should do is become a vegetarian. I kind of gulped. And I said, okay. So I told Eileen, she was in the kitchen, honey, from now on in, you heard Debbie, I have to become a vegetarian. She says, oh, don't get caught up in this. I have to change all my cooking and all that. I said, no, I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian for 16 years, never once. And the way I believe of getting over bad habits is it has to be cold turkey. So one day I decided that coffee wasn't the best thing for 2 reasons. One is it's not particularly good because it's addicting. And if you drink too much, a couple of cups, no problem, but you drink too much. I used to drink 7 or 8 cups a day. So I cut it out cold turkey. That was kind of hard. I'd walk in the kitchen in the office and I could smell the coffee and I thought, I wish I hadn't have made that commitment. But after 6 months, I could be around coffee, it doesn't bother me. So that's what made me a vegetarian, and I got onto all these other programs. And just to prove that it works, I had to take a big life insurance policy about 5 years ago. And the insurance salesman said, man, at your age, life insurance costs pretty expensive. I said, yeah, especially since I've barely ever gotten a regular policy. It was always a little bit rated because I'd had blood pressure and all that. He said, well, you're in pretty good shape, aren't you? You could probably, I might even try to get you a preferred. I said, forget that. Anyway, I went through the test, Everything turned out perfect. He said, the underwriter's really excited about your case. He'd like you to go to a special doctor, and if you can pass this doctor's test, he might give you a preferred. I said, wow, that's great. So I go to the doctor's office, and he said, you know, when people get older, there's only two things that I really worry about. Number one is your balance, and number two is your strength. He said, so let's do the balance. I said, okay. He put your legs apart. I said, yes. Okay, now what do I do? He said, close your eye. Okay. What do I do now? Well, that's it. So that's the balance test. Well, in yoga, I do some pretty complicated moves. Then the strength. He gets in the chair and he crosses his arms like this, and I'm sitting in the chair, and he said, now I want you to cross your arms like this, and I'm going to stand there like this, and I want to see how hard you can pull. And I said, well, if I pull that hard, you're going to come on, you're going to fall on me. No, he says, I'm going to be standing like this. So I sat down, he pulled the arm, I pulled the arm, and I went, and he landed right on top of me. He says, okay, you passed, that's it. So the point I'm making, I got a preferred policy at age 74, and so I got intrigued about what statistical probability is at 74 getting a deal. The underwriter said 0.5%. So this stuff works. So that's why I'm kind of a health nut, as well as many other nuts, you know. But anyway, that's the answer. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned that sometimes commitment, you can accomplish it if you kind of treat it as an obsession, but where would you draw the line between a healthy commitment and an unhealthy obsession?
You know, I didn't hear it. Could somebody?
I'll talk louder, sorry.
No, it won't go. Let somebody.
Where do you draw the line between a healthy commitment versus an obsession?
Oh, okay. I prefer the obsession. You know, if you really think about it, if my dad would have been in the death march and he would have said, you know, I'm a little tired, instead of repeating this every time about my knee, I'll do it every 5 or 10 times, he wouldn't have made it. If I would have given up at the time when I was building the business, and I don't mind telling you, I probably had negative cash flows for 7 or 8 years. There would have been many reasonable times where I'd have said, okay, enough is enough. But as I told this gentleman, success is completing your goal. Now, if it would have absolutely been where I couldn't have gone anymore and there was no way out, then obviously I'd have to give up. But you know, I want to tell you something, and this is an important principle. At the time when you're hanging there by your fingernails and you don't think you can go on anymore, and you just know that it isn't going to work, that is the time when something happens that I can't even explain. It's so profound, but something always happens that turns the tide. Now, I'll give you an example. When I used to write the checks every month, I'd say, geez, I don't have enough to pay the office and the home. If I don't pay the office, I don't have a business, and if I don't pay the home, I don't have a home. And somehow, that month, something happened, and I got a check, and I thought, whew. Next month, I'm in the same boat. Something always happened that came through. So after a while, I said, I'm not going to worry about it anymore. Something always happens to come through. And I'll give you a better example. When inflation was starting in the 70s, I thought to myself, the home prices were going up in California. If I don't get the family into a home, I'm never going to be able to afford a home, because they were going up 10, 15% a year. And at that time, a decent home cost $55,000, but you had to put $10,000 down. So I got by myself, and I visualized buying this home. I told myself I'm going to find a home no matter what happens. So I told my wife one Saturday, you know, I think there's a home out there for us. She said, what do you mean? I said, we're going to go look for a home. I know there's a home out there for us. And she looked at me like, but then she said, okay. So we went and looked. The average house was $50,000, $55,000, and you had to put $10,000 down. I had $500 in the bank. So we went for about 4 or 5 hours, and Eileen said to me, you know, hon, let's call it a day. I'm a little tired, and I don't know how we're ever going to afford this home. I said, I know. I'll tell you what, I'll take you home, and then I'll go back and look for a couple hours. She said, okay. So I go back into the neighborhood, drive down, the guy's pounding down the sign. So I looked at the house, I said, geez. Now we dribbled down to neighborhoods that cost $35,000 to $40,000. So I said to the gentleman, are you selling this home? He says, yes. I said, oh, great, I'm looking for a home. Can I see it? She's, sure, come on in. So he came in, he brought us in, and I loved the house. It was real neat, nice painted. I walk up the backyard, beautiful backyard for the kids. I thought, this is really great. And I was worried to ask him what it cost because the houses in the neighborhood were about $35,000. And even that was hard. So he said $27,900. Well, that stunned me because that was $5,000 or $6,000 underneath the market, which was unusual because it was neat and clean and all that. So I thought, oh, that's great. So I called Eileen, and I used the people's phone, and I said, Eileen, I found a house that you're going to really like, and I'd like you to come back into the neighborhood. And she says, oh, honey, yeah, just come on down. Came down, I walked her through the house. I walked in the backyard, and what do you think? She says, oh, this would be lovely, Arnold, but isn't it going to be too much? I said, well, it's $27,900. So she was shocked too. She said, that's a great thing, but how about the down payment? I said, well, we haven't got there yet, but let's keep moving. So went in there. It turns out that they had an assumable loan. Now, nowadays you don't have an assumable loan, but those, if you paid the down payment, you can assume the loan. Well, the loan was 6%, which was a good deal at the time. But in addition to that, they only had $2,500 worth of equities, so only had to come up with $2,500. So I thought, this I'm going to do. So I said to the real estate man, we're interested in buying this. He said, I think we can get him down a little bit. I said, no, this is such a good deal. I don't want to get it down. The people are great. I want to be fair. We'll pay the full price. So they said, I said, the only problem is it's going to take me 2 months to come up with the down payment. I have some of it, but I don't have it all. Oh, we're no in rush. It's okay. 2 months is fine. So we made a deal on escrow, and I said, I'm going to give you $500. That's all I had in the bank, just to show good faith. They said, great. So I gave him $500. We're driving home. Eileen says, honey, where are we going to get the other $2,000? I said, don't worry about it. We found the home. Now all we got to do is find the money. It's going to come. It's going to come. And I said, the worst is if we can't make it, they get their $500, and I lose $500. It won't be the first $500 I lost. So we're going to go for it. Well, I was able to put a deal together where I made $3,000, and I paid the $2,500. Now, here's what's interesting about being fair to people. What I didn't realize is they were going to put it into multiple listing on Monday. But since I bought it, they didn't put it into multiple listing. I didn't know that. If it would have gone into multiple listing, somebody else would have seen it was a good deal. They'd have bought it. If I'd have tried to chisel with them. So the lesson I learned in life, when somebody offers you a fair deal, don't chisel. If I can buy a stock at a good deal, I'm not going to worry about paying another 1/4 of a point. So remember that. It's very important. Well, the people really appreciated the way I did business. We became friends, and it was a wonderful experience. And 2 years later, I sold the home for $41,500, so I made a quick $13,000. And then we bought another home in California, which we bought for $56,000. And this is a lesson in contrary opinion. So the guy's looking around for a nice home, and it was a little more than we can afford. So I said, don't you have a neighborhood, even if it's a little further out? He said, oh, I got a neighborhood that's cheap, and the homes are wonderful. It's 8 years old, brand new neighborhood. The problem is they've had an earthquake and a fire. And people want to sell the homes, and the chimneys are falling off some of them. I said, oh, that's my kind of neighborhood. I'm a contrary thinker. And he says, well, you got 2 kids. I mean, do you want to move into a neighborhood with an earthquake and fire? I said, let me ask you something. I'm a businessman. What are the probabilities if a home had an earthquake and a fire, What's the probability that that's going to happen again? Very little. How often does that happen? So this is a fluke thing. 20 years from now, it might happen again. I'll be gone. So we bought the house. When we moved from Austin to California, I sold the house for $280,000. So out of my $500 investment and my $25 down payment, I made the difference between $2,500. And when I sold the other one, I took $5,000 out to fix it up. And I sold it, and we had a mortgage of $30,000, so we made $250,000. So believing in what you're going for and going for it is the key. And that gave me a real opportunity. When I came to Austin, Austin was in a real estate slump. Many of you know what happened there. And I was so excited about the opportunities that Scott and Stacy and Jim and Stacy and Scott and his wife Rebecca, they each bought homes for $50 a square foot, $150,000, and they bought huge homes. So they all made good money. I was excited about coming to Austin, and I was really excited about all the opportunities in real estate. We were so excited about real estate, we formed a real estate partnership, which we ran for about 8 years, just sopping up all the bargains. And after a while, the prices went up, and then we kind of sold the partnership out. But the way I got into that, I had a guy in the office, and he said he was a builder, and he went broke. And he said, you know, things were so bad that when a bank sees me coming, they start to close the door because he defaulted on $30 million worth of property. He was a builder, and he went broke. So he said, I can't get a loan to save my soul. And I said, well, let me ask you something. Do you have any collateral? And he said, oh, yeah, I got a beautiful home right on the hill. It's worth $240,000, and I'm looking for a $50,000 to $60,000 loan. So I thought, well, let's go a little further. I said, how much are you willing to pay for that? He said, oh, I'd gladly pay 15%. I said, you just found yourself a banker. So I told Scott, you just drive by that house and make sure it's there. And if it's worth $250,000 and we're going to lend him $60,000 and we're going to get 15%. The other good news about it is he was always late and we had a big payment penalty on top of that. So we probably made about 18 or 19%. So then I said to him, geez, we could make a little partnership on it. So I called a few clients of mine from LA. We raised, I think, $1 million and just to buy up some properties, and $900,000 I think we started with. And we just had a great time. And so this guy became an influence center. He had all of his other buddies that went broke. So he says, I know a guy in Austin who will lend you money on your property. So people were coming in. So we made loans. And the theory of the loan was just like we buy a stock. We buy to own. And that means we buy it so cheap that if the guy doesn't make the payment, we take the property, it's a win. It's not like a default and you lose your money. So if I lend you $60,000 on a $250,000 property and you default and I have to foreclose, not a bad return. If he doesn't default, I get 15%. So there's opportunities. You just have to keep your mind open for it.
My biggest question for you would be, do you have any desire at all to be able to go back in your life and change the way anything happened? If you do have the desire to, why? And if you do not, then why not?
Yeah, the question is there anything in my life that I want to change? Well, it's a two-pronged answer. A good friend of mine who introduced me in a seminar, he said, Arnie was handled, the way I look at people is what kind of cards were dealt with in life, like if you're playing poker. He said, Arnold was handled a bad life, a bad set of cards. And as he was saying that, I said, you know, technically he's right. But another way, if I hadn't have been dealt those bad cards, I wouldn't learn how to play with bad cards. And I might not have been able to achieve what I have been achieved. On the other hand, if I wasn't dealt a bad card, I might not have suffered so much, but I wouldn't have got as much. So the way I would say it, I would never want to go back, but I would not change those experiences, because the insight I got from suffering, and I'm going to read you something. These are insights you can get no other way but to suffer. And I have a quote, which we didn't have a time to get into that I wanted to, but let me read you this. And it tells you why suffering is so great. Not that I enjoy going through it, but what you learn from it. Let me read it to you. Character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved. Helen Keller. Do you know anybody else who has overcome more in their life than Helen Keller? We shall draw from the heart of suffering itself the means of inspiration and survival. Winston Churchill. There is nothing in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst condition as the knowledge that there is meaning in one's life. Viktor Frankl. Suffering becomes beautiful when anybody bears grief, great calamities, with cheerfulness, not through insensibility, but through greatness of mind. Aristotle. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. So the point I'm making is that nobody wants to suffer. But when you do, it forces your mind to stretch it so much that you get an insight that you would have never gone through, that you would have never experienced if you hadn't gone through it. Now, I'll give you an example. One of the most painful things I went through was a divorce. And there's a quote that just recently I found from Carl Jung. And he says, when you're in a relationship, don't hang on to the one that wants to leave because it prevents you from meeting the one that's coming. So there is always a new beginning after a terrible situation. And you know, a lot of the marriages in this country divorce, but it's because people don't understand what they're doing when they get married. But one of the most helpful things that my psychiatrist taught me, for those of you who are not married, he said, Arnold, whatever you do, don't marry a woman that hates her father, because subconsciously you're it. So she has all this anger, and when she's around you, you're going to inherit that anger. And it's called unearned anger. Now, if I get mad at you and you didn't do anything wrong, you're going to get double mad because I'm accusing you of not doing something, right? Or doing something. Now, here's the opposite, and I'm fortunate to get that inheritance. He said, my wife loves her father. Matter of fact, I remind her of her dad when I knock on the door with my ring. Her dad used to knock on the door with his ring, and I do that too. She told me, you know, when you knock on the door like that, it just gives me such a good feeling. So if she's upset with me, I'm going to be sure to knock on the door. Because I inherit those wonderful feelings she has towards her father. Now, if a woman, don't marry a man who's angry at his mother, because you're going to inherit the feelings of the mother without even realizing it. So if you, in that respect, I analyzed my marriage, it was doomed from the beginning. She had a problem with her dad, and I had a problem with my mom. And until I worked that out, any marriage I would have been in probably wouldn't have worked. But here's the good news. Whether it's a man or a woman, if you can work out your anger, then you're neutral. But if you can find somebody that loves their mother or father, then you get unearned anger or unearned love. And getting unearned love is not a bad thing. Okay, so I would not want to change anything because I wouldn't want to give up the insights. And they have brought me a lot of pleasure. And it's helped to form a good family. We're very proud of our family. My 7 grandkids are all just doing great. 2 of them already graduated. One of them is on the way. And the younger ones usually spend some time over our house. I have a good feeling things are going to work out. So when you live a good life and you give a good example to your kids, and my son Scott, who's one of my best friends in the business, He is now the president of the company. And Scott and I have been friends working together on this athletic career. We were on the field together. And one day we were working together on the business. He said, "Dad, I feel we're back on the track." So it's been a wonderful journey. And he's been a great son. I'm very proud of him. Any other questions?
If you weren't investing, what do you think you'd see yourself doing?
Pardon me?
If you weren't investing, what do you think you'd be doing?
Oh, I know what I'd be doing, and I'm already doing it. What I'm doing is starting a foundation. And what I'm going to start a foundation is to take the lessons that I've learned and some of the lessons that they're creating in neuroscience. You know, it's such a wonderful field. You know, they can hook you up to a machine now with a computer, and they can track your thoughts and tell you what part of the brain they take, and what part of the chemicals that are being reduced, and what those chemicals do to your body. And they are proving through quantum physics, which I do not understand, because I'd have a hard time passing a 7th grade math course. But in quantum physics, they are proving that the things that Jesus talked about, walking on water, there's a quantum physicist, one of the greatest ones in the world. He said, if you were to ask me, could I walk on water? He says, the answer is yes. Then how come you can't? Because in the great faith that you say you're going to walk on water, you have this big doubt that you know you're not, and it's going to cause you to sink. But if you could develop the feeling and the trust and the faith that you could walk on water, you could physically do it. I'm quoting the quantum physicists now. It's not my opinion. Now, I don't believe I have that kind of faith that can do it. But there are yogis that are doing things that science said they can't do. They can affect their autonomic nervous system. They can stop their heartbeat. They can be buried underground for weeks at a time. I mean, they can do things that you cannot believe through the power of the mind. So that's what the foundation is going to do. It's going to take everyday people. I'm not trying to break through on science, and I'm not trying to create any new theories. What I want to do is create simple things that will tell somebody like yourself, what do you want to do and what's the best way to go about it? Just a simple plan. And you know, all great truths are simple. And all you have to do is believe them. Now, there's a book, the author will come to me, The Biology of Belief. This guy has proven through the new science of epigenetics that your belief can change your genes and your DNA. Now, you know what Carl Jung said? If you don't learn what's in your subconscious, your life will turn out a certain way, and you will call it fate. In other words, but it isn't fate, it's the way you designed it through all your thoughts. You have 15 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and 77% of them are negative. Now just think, if you put up a screen, you got a black dot for a negative thought and an orange thought for a positive. What would the screen look like at the end of the day? Well, if you do it all your life, where do you think your life's going to go? So your life is, you are designing your life right now. As we are talking, you are thinking. You're probably thinking, this guy's nuts. But anyway, you are thinking, and those thoughts are influencing your thinking and creating your future. Now, think about it this way. You are the software. Your conscious mind is your software, and your subconscious is your brain. Now, let me read you one quote that I didn't read to you by the greatest psychologist ever lived, Carl Jung. Carl Jung, and this is in the book Robert Collier, The Secret of the Ages. Carl Gustav Jung claimed that the subconscious mind contains not only all the knowledge that is gathered during the life cycle of the individual, but in addition, it contains all the wisdom of past ages, that by drawing upon its wisdom and power, the individual may possess any good thing of life, from health and happiness to riches and success. Now, how come they don't teach you that in college? To teach you to use the software that is in your subconscious. And all great discoveries have come in through the subconscious. You know, Einstein used to dream. He used to imagine. He said, I'm not smarter than other people. I have more imagination and curiosity, which means, matter of fact, the theory of relativity came to him in a form in a dream. So think about what you have. And if you had a computer on your desk, what do they say about computers? Garbage in, garbage out. You put good information in there, you push the button, you get the right answer. Now here's the beauty about the subconscious. It does not think, it does not analyze, it just acts. So you give it an order, and you give it a belief that it's going to do, and it's going to work on it to do everything it can to bring. You know, people ask me, well, how did you get to business? I just visualized it. Now, let me give you one example you could say is coincidence, but I've had too many of them, so I know it isn't. So a friend of mine called me. He was one of my early clients, and I was talking to him, and at those days, you didn't have quotes all the time. He called me every day for quotes. So he called me from the office and gave him quotes, and fortunately, we were in an up market, and the stocks were doing good, and he was very happy. Oh, that's great, Arnie. Oh, that's wonderful. He's going. So an accountant walked by there who was the auditor. And the auditor said, were you talking to your broker? And he said, no, he's not a broker. He's an investment advisor, a friend of mine. He said, I'm looking for an investment advisor. Could you introduce me? He said, oh, sure. So he called me, Arnie, our accountant wants to do it. So we set up an appointment. I was very excited. I put out all my paperwork. I had it all ready. He came in and he said, you know what? I have an accounting firm, and we're always looking for people who can manage money for our clients. So you don't have to show me any of your paperwork. Here's the way we'll do it. I'm going to give you $50,000, which 40 years ago was a pretty good account. And I'm going to have you manage it for 3 years. And if you do a good job after 3 years, I'm going to recommend you to the clients. I thought, geez, this is great. So I showed him the stocks, and I remember one stock, Diamond Crystal Salt. He said, Arnie, this is such a good deal. Why don't we put most of the $50,000 in there? I said, no. We have a discipline. Benjamin Graham taught to diversify, and so much in each stock, and you never know what's going to happen. So he said, okay. Well, Diamond Crystal Salt, Texaco drilled into their ground, caved in their salt mine, and the stock went from 26 to 16 or something like that. Now, they had insurance, eventually came back, and stock came back. But that taught me and him a lesson. He said, boy, you really taught me. So anyway, after 3 years, he calls me up and he said, Arnie, I'm ready to introduce you to the first client. I said, okay. He said, why don't you come to the Hillcrest Country Club and I'll introduce you to the client. Well, I was a little embarrassed to drive up to the Hillcrest Country Club in my old Ford, kind of a beat-up car, and here I drive up and there's nothing but Cadillacs and Mercedes, you know. But anyway, I sat down and talked to the guy, and he said, well, Hal's told me all about you, and I'd like you to handle my account. Here it is. So he said, why don't you take a look at it? So I took a look at it, and I looked at the bottom line, and it's $800,000. Now, for a guy who thought $50,000 was a big deal, you can imagine how I felt, and I thought I almost got a little dizzy there. So anyway, I got the $800,000 account. 3 weeks later, another guy comes in. He said, Hal told me all about you. I'd like to come down and open an account. I saw I laid out all my paperwork. She said, no, you know, Arnie, I'm a little running late for a golf course. What does it take to open an account? And I said, well, I was going to say $50,000. He says, would $300,000 do? And I go, oh, yeah, sure. So he writes out a check. And, you know, he said, hey, next time I'm in town, I'll spend a little more time, but I'm really late for my golf game. I said, okay. So he writes out the check, and as he's going out the door, I look at the check, and it's made out to me. Well, as an investment counselor, we can't take the money in our name. It's got to be in the brokerage name. So I said, hey, I don't want to mention his name. Mr. Jones, you shouldn't have filled it out to me. I can't take it. It got to be filled brokerage. I'm like, oh, God. He goes, I tell you what, Arnie. Takes the check. Here, you fill it in. I got to go. So he gives me a blank check, signed $300,000. He says, listen, I'm in a rush here. You fill it in. Hey, good luck. Boom, he's out the door. Now, if you've ever been a salesman, that's a pretty easy sale, right? So what happened is this guy, who just died a few years ago, he was my mentor as a businessman. He had the largest accounting firm on the West Coast. So every once in a while, he'd hand me a client. They're all great people. They all trusted him, and they trusted me. And so you could say, well, that was just a lucky break. I don't think if that only happened once in my life, I'd say, yeah. But there's been a lot of things like that. So when you have the right program, the universe finds ways to put you together with the right people, and things happen. So set that goal, believe it's going to happen, never give up on achieving it.
Well, we give Arnold a big round of applause.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Huh?
So you've done this once before, so you kind of know a little bit about what's coming, but small gift for you that nobody outside of Bulldog Investment Company has.
Okay.
So,
Oh, great.
honesty is an expensive gift. Don't expect it from cheap people.
All right.
Knowing how Arnold loves quotes, that's a quote from Warren Buffett.
Well, that is great.
You will be the only one outside of our group that has one of those.
Okay.
Thank you.
It looks kind of good on me, doesn't it?
Arnold, also, in honor of your time and coming and sharing, next semester, the top performing students in our program are going to receive the Arnold Van Den Berg Scholarship.
Oh, wow, wow.
We can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for staying.
Thank you all for coming. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you enjoy home.